For decades, the financial system operated on one single measure of success: profit. But what if that was never the full picture? What if every bond issued, every loan approved, and every investment made carries a second balance sheet? One that measures its cost to the planet and its impact on people. That second balance sheet has a name, and it's called sustainable finance. And it might be one of the most important conversations that we can have right now. Welcome to the third episode of the Finpact Hub, where finance is the tool and impact is the purpose. Our guest today is a globally recognized expert in sustainable finance. She is the founder of Moxie Future, an education, insights, and communication platform committed to systems-level change at the intersection of sustainable finance, climate, and gender. She is also the author of Financial Feminism, a woman's guide to investing for a sustainable future. Before founding Moxie, she served as the head of Asia for the UN-supported Principles for Responsible Investment and as chief executive of the Association of Sustainable and Responsible Investment in Asia. Most recently, she was a partner and MENA Sustainable Finance Leader at EY. She has advised financial institutions, governments, and regulators across multiple countries and is now based right here in the UAE. Our honorable guest today is Jessica Robinson. Today, we're getting into the world of sustainable finance, what it actually is, the real tools and instruments that move capital towards genuine social and environmental change, and most importantly, what any of us can do to be a part of it. This is one of those episodes that I think will really change your perspective on money and its power. I'm so excited to get into it. Thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to the podcast, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind invitation.
It's so lovely to have you here. So let's just get straight into it. Before we dive into the details and technicalities, could you just give us a brief of what is sustainable finance? How is it different to the way money traditionally moved and flowed?
Sure. And it's a big question. As someone who's been in this space for sort of 20 plus years, we've had a lot of different terminology. And I think that, anyone who's new to the space as well, they hear many terms thrown around, which can be, I think, at times quite confusing. I mean, I think the simplest way to put it, when you look at it compared to traditional finance, you're actually making decisions of where to invest, where to finance, still seeking financial returns, but at the same time really looking for positive environmental and social outcomes as well. I think, historically, finance has always been about short-term gains, maximizing profit. But really what we've seen over the years, and this is really, particularly in the last 10 years, the financial markets, the financial institutions, the big institutional investors are really starting to recognize that there are a whole load of costs and externalities that we just simply have not priced in. So I'll give you some examples. Clean air. Is a very important one. And this is actually quite personal to me. I first became aware of this. It was about, 20 years ago. I was living in Beijing and I just had my first daughter. And I was standing there looking out onto Beijing, and it was just at this point where pollution was very, very extreme. It was very yellow. There was so much sulfur. And I think for me personally, it was like, oh gosh, how does this happen? We now live in a world where the air is so polluted. And as an economist, this is what I started to explore. And what I realized is these externalities are simply not priced in by our financial markets. And so sustainable finance at its core is saying, what are we not pricing in? What do we need to price into the values we put on companies, the values we put on projects and assets that really reflect this whole and more holistic view of the world? And those are things around environmental risks, things like biodiversity, but also social impact as well. So, housing, infrastructure, education, all the things that we need as communities and societies to make us safe, happy, equal, just, and alike. So that's sort of the spirit and the philosophy of it. But behind that, as I said, there's a lot of terminology, and there's been a lot of phases over the years of what's happened. We've seen a lot of talk around ESG, so you've probably heard that term, environmental social governance, ESG integration, which if you were an investor, you'd probably say, okay, what are my ESG risks? So it's very much a risk lens. You'll hear a lot about sustainable investing, responsible investing. And in fact, today is the 20-year anniversary of the United Nations supported Principles for Responsible Investments, which I actually was head of Asia for many moons ago.
What
and
a coincidence that we're filming on this day.
It is. And it's actually a very significant milestone, because 20 years of industry professionals working on these issues, it's something to be celebrated.
It is definitely a milestone, yeah.
It is. And I mean, we can talk about political headwinds later, but I think let's celebrate that for what it is. You've probably heard a lot about impact investing as well.
Yes.
Which is a slightly different thing. It's, intentionally funding certain types of solutions.
So maybe we can just take a stop there for a second and look at the difference between sustainable finance and impact investing.
Yes.
So is maybe sustainable finance more broad, covering multiple layers of impact, and impact investing is maybe, I guess, depending on the investor? Would that be right or not so much?
Yeah, I would always look at it through the investor lens.
Okay.
I always view sustainable finance as sort of an umbrella term. And within that, you have other components. Impact investing, it's not a niche, but it is investors who are specifically looking for a certain type of impact. Say, for example, education for underprivileged children, right? So you're looking for tools, whereas sustainable finance is a bigger, more sort of, what are we trying to change in terms of our financial markets, and how are we trying to factor in those risks into the decisions we make. Impact investing is very popular with certain high net worth family offices and the like, whereas sustainable finance actually looks at that broader financial ecosystem as well.
Sense.
Yeah. But there's a lot of terminology, so I try not to get too bogged down in it. I do think we'll hear less and less about ESG. Even in the last 12 to 24 months, we've heard less and less reference to ESG.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's become very associated with the compliance framework. So we've seen, particularly in Europe, and we will talk about regional differences later, but in a lot of ESG reporting. And I'm a former, I've done a lot of strategy work, and I do believe, a lot of companies and banks have started with ESG reporting from like, what do we need to make publicly available, as opposed to how do we need to make our decisions different. And so I think it's sort of the wrong way around. I do think that ESG has had its day. There are new flavors coming in, which I think is a good thing. We hear a lot more around things around regenerative finance, which I think is really interesting. Circularity.
So what is regenerative finance?
So regenerative finance is quite a new concept, and it's actually very relevant to this region. And it's really looking at our economic systems as well as our planetary and our societal systems, and thinking, we don't just want to grow, we need to regenerate. And this is very important when you look at things like biodiversity and the ocean, right? It's not just about the positive impact. We need to regenerate. We have so overused, overworked our natural resources. And so we need to think beyond the immediate, which is, how do we really create new growth systems? And I think that's possibly what sits at the core. And when I started in sustainable finance, one of the things that I realized, again, back to being an economist, is that a lot of this is around, our systems have been about extractive systems. So what can we take from the world? Whether that be resources, whether that's fossil fuels, the minerals that we have, but it's also things like labor. We talk about gender. There's a lot of unpaid labor for women, right? There's been a lot of stuff around. And so our systems have been very extractive. And I think at the core of sustainable finance is saying, well, actually, we cannot continue to extract without limits, I think.
We can't take and not give.
Yes. And we've taken so much that I think the giving now has to be much bigger than we are currently thinking. And then it also has to focus on regeneration.
That is really interesting. It's a really interesting point that you brought up. And I think, so now regenerative finance is about looking at ways the ways that we can finance giving back.
It's not just about giving back, it's about regenerating our natural resources. Yeah. So we can't simply, it's not just about clean energy anymore, is it? right? When you look at, say, for example, the biodiversity systems we have and how critical, and I think oceans are a very important example of that. It's not just simply about protecting them anymore. It's about regenerating them, because we've depleted our natural stock so much that we need to have a complete rethink. And I think that's really started to happen in the last 12 months. And as I said, I think this region has done some really interesting work. There have to be limits to growth as we see it. And I think those discussions are starting to happen, thankfully.
Thankfully. I was just going to ask you that, like, how do you see this kind of manifesting in our systems, in our societies now? Do you think it's growing at the right pace?
No, not at all, unfortunately. I mean, I think one thing, and this comes sort of back to the philosophy of what sustainable finance is. I think finance is not an objective in itself. It's a tool to help us make different decisions. And the philosophy, or sort of the philosophical questions we need to ask ourselves, is when what is the purpose of capital? It's a tool to make decisions about finite resources. And there always has to be a human element in that. In fact, everything's about the human element, the human impact. So I think, it's really being able to step back and saying, okay, well, if we accept that finance is not an objective as an end in itself, which, by the way, a lot of people don't, because there are a lot of people who just want bigger bank balances, right? Bigger profit, right? But if we assume that the purpose of capital is much deeper and more philosophical than that, then we have to then ask ourselves the deep questions that go with it. Your question around have we done enough? Have we gone fast enough? Unfortunately, no. And the really sad thing is, when I first moved to this region, so I was in Asia for about 10 years, and then I moved here 9 years ago. So many people asked me that question when I moved here, and I said, no, we're not moving fast enough, but we are accelerating. And now I wish I could say that, but actually I feel like we're going backwards in many ways. I do think that our impetus to move faster there are many positive signals. Like, for example, the fact that you do this podcast, I think, is phenomenal, because,
thank you,
to focus on this and to bring in voices of experience, but to also focus on, you're a young voice who wants to highlight these issues. And then you're also a woman, right? So I have a lot of optimism about younger generations and people who are genuinely motivated to make change happen. So, despite my fearful comments around we need to do more, I am optimistic in some fronts.
I'm glad, and I think the support that we get from people like you, experienced people in the field, to help us, learn more about this field and hopefully later, grow into it and contribute to it, really makes a difference. And the reason I smiled so big when you were talking about why finance is a tool earlier is because that's the slogan of the podcast. Oh, finance is the tool and impact is the purpose.
Yeah, I like that.
So I'm really glad that you said that and that we're really getting into it, because at the core, this is what I want the podcast to be about, how we can use finance as a tool to really create a positive impact on the world.
Yes.
And then looking at all the different types of different positive impact on the world.
Yes.
Whether it was environmental or social or all the different types of impact. So something that I like to try to do on the show is really get practical about, what finance looks like for impact. So would you be able to walk us through some of the tools used in sustainable finance, how they're used to make an impact?
Yeah. And I think, again, lingo. The finance world loves lingo, and a lot of people assume that because they're not from the finance world, they don't know, they don't want to get involved, or they think it's too much. What I discovered early on in my career, that's not true. You just got to say the words with confidence. I think when it comes to sustainable finance decisions, it obviously depends on who's making the decision. So if you're talking about government, institutional money, that's the scale of money, is huge. You're probably going to be looking sort of at the bond market. So, bonds are really critical for large-scale infrastructure. So you may have heard a lot about green bonds and social bonds. Green bonds are obviously investing in big infrastructure to achieve certain environmental outcomes. Social bonds, similar. You might be looking at social housing or education. Healthcare is actually quite important. You'll hear a lot about sustainability bonds, which quite often combines the two. And these are big, large-scale bond issuances, either from governments or from corporates. We've seen the UAE, a number of corporates issue some various bonds actually over the years. The bond market, the green bond market really boomed, has boomed a lot over the decades. You'll see things around...
Sorry, could we just stop there for a second? I try to make the podcast accessible. You know, like you were saying, there's a lot of lingo that
you're going to ask me exactly what it is.
Yes, so I'm just going to say that first, but for our listeners who maybe don't have a financial background, so a bond is a financial instrument used to make money, so to borrow money. And, you know, sometimes when we hear things like green bonds, they're used for specific purposes. So maybe we can dive a bit deeper into what a green bond really is. Like, how does that work?
So if you were, let's give some examples. So you are a corporate and you want to, you have a lot of shopping malls and you want to put in a whole bunch of environmental features like maybe solar panels, energy efficiency measures. But to do that, you need to raise, say, X billion of dollars. In order to do that, you think, okay, I'm going to go to the financial markets. I'm going to package a green bond, which says I need to raise, say, 10 billion to specifically finance these improvements, which will have positive environmental impacts, such as reduced energy use. Could be, I mean, I think recycling is a bit of a weak one, but say it could be, you know, there'd be a whole series of things. And then you go to investors and say, this is the package. If you loan me this money, I assure you that I will achieve X, Y, Z. I mean, and then you have all the consultants that sit around that confirm, they do all the checks and balances. So that's essentially what it is. But companies can do that and governments can do that as well. So I think Côte d'Ivoire's issued a sustainability bond. Your previous speaker was at the World Bank. So the World Bank have done a lot of bond issuances. But again, this is about raising money from investors specifically to focus on initiatives or enhancements or whatever that's aligned specifically to environmental and social criteria.
Perfect.
There's a lot of transparency around it, as there should be. And then you have things like sustainability-linked loans. So a corporate might borrow money from Emirates NBD or something, and they may say it's a sustainability loan, so it's linked to certain achievements. And I think the idea being that you get a better interest rate, or you pay a certain coupon, or I mean that's the philosophy behind it. But as I said, this is big money. So this is the kind of money you need for big infrastructure,
large scale projects.
So it's your governments, it's your big investors, and your big companies as well.
And if we zoom in a bit more and say, if we look at some of the instruments available to regular investors, like individual investors, what would those look like?
So again, you then have obviously funds. So you've got the bonds on that side. You've got anything that's traded on, anything that's publicly traded. So on the stock markets, we've seen a growth of what we call ESG funds, mutual funds. Again, these would be a collection of companies that are measured against certain ESG criteria. Now, these have come under quite a lot of scrutiny for greenwashing claims, but we can talk about that in a minute. And there are other types of traded products, whether they could be thematic funds. So one thing I'm quite interested in are clean energy funds, right? So as a personal investor, I'm looking for a fund that says, okay, we're specifically looking for clean energy companies, say in this region or this region. So you can do this as an individual investor. We also see a lot of, obviously, financial advisors and financial institutions do this trading, high net worths, family offices. So where there's a large pool of capital, they'll go into the public markets as well. So that's one area, but more as an individual. There are very different ways in which you could look at it. You can access the stock markets, whether it's through funds, through ETFs, which are slightly more accessible products, but you can also through private capital. So private capital is essentially money investment that goes into private companies that are not listed on the stock markets. So venture capital, you may have heard of, hedge funds, or right at the beginning, angel investing. So, you know, as an individual, you may choose to invest, you may choose to become an angel investor and invest in startups, which is something I do quite a lot of with my gender lens, my gender finance. So I specifically look for female founders to invest in startups. So there are a lot of tools. It depends on where you sit in the value chain. There are decisions you may make, say, if you work in the financial industry versus as an individual. One thing I would say as an individual, everyone assumes that this kind of investing is only for billionaires, but it's not. And this is very important. Whether you have a holding in a pension fund, you're already in the capital markets, you're already investing. And it's a lot more accessible today than it has ever been. And I think for younger generations, but given, you know, we now bank on our phones, right? We've seen some great financial provider apps. You know, I'm
Mobile banking is
mobile
huge
banking.
now.
I mean, I'm such a massive fan of Weo at the moment because it makes it so easy. Again, you can invest directly. You know, when I was younger, to start investing, you'd need like $10,000 or something, right? And you'd need to know a financial advisor, and you'd have to have a broker, and it's not like that now. So it's all very accessible, and there are some great sort of tools and books. In fact, actually, my first book I wrote quite a lot about how to invest sustainably for a retail investor. But yeah, there are loads of tools and ways to do it.
Now, speaking of investment and gender finance, I know you've written a book on financial feminism.
Yes.
Right. So can we dive into that a bit more? What is gender finance? Because I know you work a lot on that. And just anything you'd like to share maybe about your book or just about the topic in general.
So gender finance is something that's very deeply personal to me. So my first book, Financial Feminism, was really around working with supporting women to really understand the opportunities that sit around sustainable investing, and then two, to really provide a practical guide on how to do it. And I think, you know, I think it's really exciting. We're seeing this massive transfer of wealth to women. It's crazy when I put it out there, but like, it's around 40% of wealth is transferring into the hands of women. A lot of it's generational as well, which is very exciting. I mean, about time, right? But with it goes a really exciting opportunity for women to take ownership of their investment and financial decisions. And I think, you know, one of the reasons I talk a lot about it in my first book, and in my second book, which is called When Women Lead, I use gender finance as a case study because I want to demonstrate it's a perfect example how women can take ownership of their decisions and really drive systems level change, which is just phenomenal. So gender finance is this. And it's really quite simple.
I can see how passionate you are about it. And I love it. I love it.
I do.
It's exactly what we need to hear. We need to know about these things.
No, absolutely. I mean, it is really simple. You make an investment decision based on you want positive outcomes for women and girls. Now, this takes different forms. It could mean it's a female founder. So a female founder is setting up a business and you want to support her. It's delivering products and services to women and girls. We've seen a lot of this in the health space. I don't know if, you know, it's great. I mean, a lot of people are talking about how so many health companies are underfunded for women specifically. You know, there's a lot of research done on cancer for men, but so little done for women. You know, you see like fertility, menopause, all of this stuff.
If I start talking about this topic, I will never end. I will never stop. I feel so passionately about this that, you know, the lack of research on women, especially in health, is really disheartening.
I know. And this is what gender finance really seeks to address. You know, on the one hand, we've got these women stepping into this wealth, which is such an exciting opportunity. But on the other hand, we're seeing women build businesses that are solving societal problems. And I see this not just in my research and my consulting work, but I see it in the practical work I do as a gender lens investor. 9 times out of 10, a woman has seen a problem and she tries to fix it, right? Whether that's maternal health, for example, whether it's access to menopausal screening, whether it's mental health issues, right? They're trying to fix a problem. You don't see a bunch of 23-year-old women going off to raise a crypto fund, right? Because they want to make money quickly, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, money coming to the hands of women creating amazing businesses, but yet 2% of VC funding goes to female founders. And we've been stuck on that number for 10 years.
2% for
and
10 years.
In some markets, it's 1%, right? And then that's before you even talk about women of color. So
why do you think that is? Why is there such a big gap where money is just not flowing to women who have the ideas, who have, the idea to make change?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's complex. And actually, again, I've just written this chapter in my new book because I think it's so important that we raise this subject. Women, unfortunately, the financial investment decision makers are primarily men still. We look at the number of men in the financial industry, number of men in VC funds, et cetera, et cetera. When a woman goes to pitch, a male investor usually doesn't really understand or groupthink, they only understand people who look like them and therefore that's where the money flows. There's a lot of data around women get asked, what are the risks and why are you going to fail? Whereas a man gets asked, how big do you make it? Right. And so there's a lot of unconscious bias. I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen around that. I think women as investors, and I've seen this firsthand, we need to work with women as investors to build confidence. We've been told for so long, women don't know how to handle money. It's not their domain, right? Which we know is absolute rubbish, right? So we need to change that. Most financial advisors are still men. So there's a whole sort of complexity around that. And what I found really interesting in my research, 2 things actually. Women make decisions differently. We like to talk to our peers. So we like to come together collectively. And 2, we do genuinely care about the impact of our decisions. And so we do research. We worry about, supply chains. So if I said to you, okay, I've got this great company, it's making 20% returns, but we use child labor, you're not going to invest in it, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so the time and time again, there's a lot of data that women really do care about the impacts of these decisions. And so we need to provide services within the financial industry to support women in this way. So it's all good, but it's hard. I wrote Financial Feminism in 2019. I wish things have changed. Unfortunately, we're still looking at the same statistics. The difference being this transfer of wealth is becoming much more significant. And we have more data now. We have more proof that female-founded businesses generally outperform. They generally consider longer-term risks better. They deliver better societal impact. Female fund managers manage risk better. I mean, the data's there. So, yeah, I mean, it's an upward hill struggle, and that's partly my second book, When Women Lead, talks a lot about how we see this positive leadership, not just in economics and business and finance, but in politics and society, in climate and sustainability. And so I don't know, we just got to keep doing things like this and having these podcasts as well.
We have to keep working on it. Yes. I know, although it's not where we want it to be, there has been some progress, and you're saying that there's been more data. Yes. Is that right? Yeah. Over the years, yes. Which is honestly an issue I know with anything financial, especially when it comes to financial inclusion. I've been working on my dissertation around financial inclusion as well and financial development, and obviously the gaps in the data is just it hurts. But yeah, a lot of the things that I found in my research as well have been relating to gender finance and how financial exclusion is also worse for women around the world. Yep. In 2012, there was a statistic that really, really shocked me, which is in 2012, 50% of the adult population in the world was unbanked. 50%. That's an insane number. Now, over the years, thankfully, that number has started to go down, but the spread is even greater for women. Oops. So there was a statistic in Kenya where 70% of agricultural labor was done by women, but they owned less than 20% of the land.
Yeah.
So these are the issues, that caused further financial exclusion, that, I think lessen the power of women and the money in their hands, lessen their financial power. So hopefully we can continue to work on these issues and hopefully see a change over the next few years with more long-term data.
Yes, and I think the data is really important because having worked with gender lens funds directly, it's been so hard watching these amazing female fund managers trying to raise capital and being told, well, you don't have a track record, you don't have the data. Actually, now they have the data, they have the track record. It's still difficult, but it still comes back to why can a 23-year-old go and raise 20 million from his dad's buddy for a crypto fund? So my view is let women investors start creating their own tables, and that's where we get in, rather than trying to make our little place at a table.
That's where we create change.
Yeah.
So the problem is not in capital itself, it's where the capital is going.
Yeah. And it's who's making the decisions. Yeah.
Okay, let's dive a bit deeper. Could you give us an example of a project that you worked on relating to sustainable finance? Maybe something that really stuck with you, one of your favorite projects.
Yeah, I really like this question, but I'm going to give two examples because my work, I have had quite a colourful career in that I have, I've lived and worked all over the world. So I'm from London, I lived and worked in New York. I was then in Beijing, then Hong Kong, and I worked across Asia for many years. I've been in the Middle East, working across the region, and now I do a lot of work in Africa. And in that time I've done private and public sector work. So I've worked with governments, I've run think tanks, I've been a management consultant. So I think when I was looking at the question, I was reflecting back and I was thinking, what do I look at from my thing? So two areas. One, so I did a lot of work when I was in Asia around the ecosystem and the policy framework. So, for example, I worked with the Hong Kong government on building the green finance policy framework, which was, back in 2014, so quite a long time ago. And it was one of the first financial centres that said, right, we're going to do this. And for me, as a project, as an individual, as a professional who really believes in sustainable finance, it was the most rewarding because we were providing the market, we were providing financial institutions, the regulator, the central bank, with guidance and recommendations on how we could advance green finance, as it was called then. And it really sort of set the rules of the game. And for me, that was a hugely successful personal project. For many reasons, and also because no one else was, some financial markets were doing it, but not many. So that was one. And then the other one is more recent, and it's probably a series of projects that I've worked on in working with governments particularly in the Middle East and in Africa. So looking at governments who want to set up a big investment fund, so have a strategy around really trying to focus and get finance and investment into certain sectors, primarily climate tech, but also agriculture. And actually there's an overlap because you've got agri-tech as well. And the reason I find these sustainable finance projects so rewarding and successful is because you're dealing with real world problems. Agriculture is around food security. It's around employment. It's around rural employment. It's around women's access to employment. It's around resilience. There are so many components of that really I find incredibly rewarding and impactful because it's taking a sort of theoretical strategic view of, right, we need to use this capital and deploy it to this and this and this, but it's relating it to something that really impacts on people's lives. The agriculture space, I think, is really, really, for me personally, very, very rewarding because it not only is trying to crack a problem, but it's also building economies for the future. And so, yeah, I think that would probably be the two areas. I know they're not quite sort of projects I've worked on, but the two things I think are incredibly exciting for me as a professional.
That was a very perfect answer. And I'm so glad that you brought that up and these examples specifically. And I feel so passionately about it when you're talking about it, because it's really refreshing to see finance being used for something and us being able to see the impact, really, like especially with agriculture and these sectors. A lot of the times I feel like we talk about finance and investments and they're investing in things that are supposed to have a social impact, but we never really like see it. It's never really tangible. So in, these fields that you're talking about, it's really nice to see, capital being used for something that can really make a change and it being, seen and tangible.
And I think this is the difference. We touched on ESG before. ESG was really around compliance and risk, and there was a lot of regulation, a lot of reporting around it. To me, sustainable finance as we go forward, and regenerative finance and whatever terms we use, this is around how we build the economies that we need for now and the future. And so to me, sustainable finance isn't, okay, we've clocked 10% financial return, but we can check box. We've signed these principles or whatever. That's not what sustainable finance is to me. This is, how do we use capital, back to the purpose of capital, to deliver the benefits that really our planet and our people need to reap. And things around food security and health are just basic human rights. Yeah.
Yes.
And that to me is, the tool of finance, as you said, with the strapline. That's where the answer is, I believe.
I don't know what to respond to that. It's so great. That's exactly what I love to hear. And I hope that, more people hear that through this podcast and just in general, that we start to have these conversations more, because like you said, it's just the most basic things and we've been at it for decades, like we can really make a change, but we just need to, know where to allocate the capital and how to do it in the right way.
But this is the reality check.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It is.
It is hard. And I say that as someone who's sort of given 20 years of her career to this.
I know.
And it does. The last year has been tough, I think, for a lot of people in this industry, because we feel like we've gone back a little bit. I think we're regrouping and sort of refocusing. I think the problem is sometimes people want big ambitions to fail. And so we've seen a lot of challenges around greenwashing. So companies that have said they've done X, Y, Z, turns out they haven't. But that is not a reason not to do it. And so, this whole over-compliance that we've seen, and I know we talked, we were asking about regional differences, and Europe has been very burdened with compliance-driven regulation. What I do think in this region, it's really exciting, is there's a lot of focus on diversification, obviously, the growth around regenerative growth, but then you also look to Africa, as we talk about, agricultural transformation, economic transformation, but it's also around people's right to have ownership of their resources and to be able to have a happy, respectful, safe life. And then you go to sort of China and Asia, where I've spent a lot of my career. We've seen China very interestingly transform. Actually, it's gone through an industrial revolution. It's just a lot of people haven't noticed, or maybe they choose not to notice. When, as I said, when I lived in Beijing, 20 years ago, China was sort of, the highest polluter, and then whatever. They've quietly, completely reconfigured their economy.
That's amazing.
And I think this region as well, I think is on that journey. It's a different journey, but I think it is a journey that it's on. I think the reality check is that it doesn't get any easier. I used to say, and this is how naive I was, one day we'll talk about not sustainable finance, we'll just talk about finance on the assumption that all finance would factor this in. What I've learned with age and experience is no. What you need leading voices, leaders who truly say, this is why we need capital and this is what we're going to do.
Leaders who care.
Yeah. Yes, we do. And young generations who put in the time to learn about it and then actually bring it into their careers and the choices that they make as well.
Hopefully we'll be able to contribute as much as you have. So I know that you've mentioned greenwashing a few times, and I think it's a term people hear all over, everywhere on social media and stuff. Can we get into what greenwashing actually is?
Yeah, I mean, anyone can throw it around. I mean, it all started with when companies and funds were saying, okay, we are making these big claims that we are going to achieve X, Y, Z targets. This is what we're going to invest in. This is what we're going to finance.
These are environmental objectives.
Largely, but not all. I mean, they use the word green, but actually it relates to societal as well. And then it turns out in reality that hasn't actually happened. It's easy to make a big announcement, a big press release. And then it's much harder to actually deliver on that. I think so that has, and we have, NGOs, we have think tanks that do this work, and rightly so, right? You can't just make an announcement and then not deliver on it. So this has been a real issue, particularly in the European market as well, because reputationally, a lot of companies really been under attack. We've had something, but then you have the flip side. I don't know if you've had a green hushing.
I haven't. No, what is green hushing?
I haven't heard less of this. So there are companies that have gone, okay, if we make a statement that we're putting in place this energy efficiency program into our stores, we don't want to tell anyone. Okay. We're going to hush it because if we get under attack or scrutiny, it's just going to damage our reputation. Okay. So,
is that quite rare?
I don't know. It's probably less in this market. It's probably less of an issue in this market. But I think in Europe, companies have been very cautious. Now, the other challenge we've got, and this actually really saddens me, a lot of companies in the last 24 months made big climate commitments and DEI commitments, and they're all scaling them back, which is very sad. And a lot of them are doing it very surreptitiously. Because of the political headwinds, which is very sad. So yeah, greenwashing is a challenge, but so is a company making a commitment and then not
being able to meet it. Yeah. But this is the world, right? There will always be, I think, exogenous factors that affect how much we're able to contribute to big things like this. What do you think?
No, I disagree.
Really?
I think if we say that, if we accept that this is the world, then we will never change things. And this is actually the philosophy of my second book, When Women Lead, because we have so many examples of women who step into different leadership positions across all walks of life. And they are driving such positive change, right? We have these models of leadership. Our job now is how do we elevate these women? How do we build more companies or more universities or more civil society structures that actually present 50% of women at the table? And it comes back a bit to gender finance. If we can't have all those women at the table, then let's build our own tables. So no, don't accept that this is the way the world is.
I think what I was trying to say is that I think there are always limitations to capital, and big political tensions or sometimes even environmental factors can just affect how much we're able to contribute. So maybe if at the beginning of the year a company or an investor has made this big claim that they want to achieve this by the end of the year, but then because of all these exogenous factors, they weren't able to contribute as much, like financially, like there was a limit. They just weren't able to.
I think if you take the lid off the tin, what you find, and this is anecdotal, it's based on my experience, it's very rare that there's a situation that there's not enough funding to deliver on, say, certain gender targets. It's highly likely that funding's gone elsewhere.
Somewhere else.
Yeah. Like we see this with this whole AI bubble and boom and sending people to space, right? It's a vanity.
Yeah.
It's a vanity thing. So I think, again, we have to take a step back and say, what world do we want to live in? What world do we want to create? If we want to create one that's peaceful, harmonious, kind, there's happiness, there's equality, then we have to use capital and finance in a different way. And honestly, the guys that have been doing it for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years have not got it right. So something has to change, which is where, your generation comes in.
I said this at the beginning of the podcast. I said, I think this is an episode that will really change the way you think about money, and you are changing the way that I think about money. No, you are so right, because, you know, when I was thinking about limitations, I was thinking about capital limitations. Like, there just isn't enough money because of the circumstances. But then, you know, you redirected and said, but that's not the issue. Like, the issue isn't a limitation of capital. Like, we have enough money. It's not going to the right places.
We absolutely have enough capital. The issue is not a constraint on capital. The issue is the deployment of that capital. Yeah. And I think that's the hard truth. Yeah.
We'll work on it. What else do we want to talk about today? I know that you have a lot of experience across regions.
Yes.
So I'm interested to see whether you think that impact takes a different shape or definition in different regions.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, this is something I've really enjoyed in my professional life. And one of the reasons I've been very intentional about living in different regions and working. The challenges and the needs and the priorities in each of those regions are very different. I mean, Europe, as I said before, has been sort of, as Europeans do, as the European Union has done, has gone in deep dived, and it's become very prescriptive. I think that's been a good thing. There are a lot of complaints about how onerous that has been, and there will be adjustments. But I think if you looked, as I said, to the Middle East, there are huge opportunities that are coming with this transition. And I think that's very exciting. You see a lot around new technologies, and I think what the UAE has been really great at is really attracting new technologies, investing in new technologies, like whether it's green hydrogen, all around clean energy. So I think, you know, that focus has been phenomenal. And also actually crowding in the intellectual capital. You know, it's not just about the money here, right? You've got to have capital that invests in commercially viable companies and ideas. And I do think that's something the UAE has done incredibly well.
Very well.
I think in Africa, so I'm now working more and more in Africa. The focus on sustainable development is sort of pervasive in everything, right? But this is not about fixing emissions reductions. It's not, you know, development has to be inclusive. And it's about giving, as we said before, you know, people a livelihood, not just subsistence, a livelihood. And so the impact that you're looking to have is very different. And I think finance needs to be delivered in different ways in certain countries. So I'm working quite a lot in West and Central Africa. You know, you talked about access to finance and financial exclusion and inclusion. You know, we have mobile technologies now, and we're just not using them enough to allow, like you said, the 50% of unbankable people are unbanked. I mean, I know that figure's changing, but again, you know, as a region, we have to find solutions that, you know, build on technology, address that need, you know, and then really democratize the access to finance that those individuals, whether they have a small business, whether they're growing their business, whether it's a woman who's just running a very small business, right? It's how do we drive that impact? So the lens that you take as an investor or a capital allocator will vary from region to region. I think
based on their needs.
Yeah, based on their like, I mean, you know, Southeast Asia as well has, as a region very dear to my heart as well, has a lot of challenges. But again, it's like democratizing access to finance, which again is the financial inclusion piece, I think.
So we've talked a lot about, you know, us not being at the right place with certain aspects of sustainable finance. We have seen some improvement in some statistics, but largely there is still a long way to go. So what do you think are some changes that absolutely need to be done to get us going in the right direction and at the right pace?
Okay, so the greenwashing thing, I know we've talked about. We have to deal with that, because I think that undermines market confidence. I do think there are a lot of what we call in sort of finance world bankable projects. So you've got the big banks are looking for projects that they can invest in. You've got institutional investors, the same thing. I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of preparing these projects so they're ready to receive the finance, because that finance comes with certain criteria like emissions reductions, or are you achieving sort of gender equality through the company growth or whatever. So I think there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done, and I do think that needs to be done very on the ground. I don't think that's very prescriptive. I think you need, which actually then means you need to build capacity and capability. And a lot of what I'm sort of reconfiguring my focus for the next chapter of my career is, one, teaching, like actually sort of teaching about sustainable finance as much as I can, and then two, capacity building on the ground, so that companies, projects, assets are in a position to accept the finance and then use it effectively.
So what does capacity building look like on the ground?
So it can be, I mean, all sorts of different things. If I was to say focus on, say we're doing some work in Senegal and Ivory Coast, it would be working with government, so government teams, and saying, okay, if you want to receive funding, say from the World Bank or one of the development finance institutions, you need to have this policy in place. You need to have governance. So when they lend you the money, it's clear where it's going. Even actual basic stuff around sustainable finance. But even that, in this region, we still do quite a lot of sort of capacity and capability building. It's interesting how so many people still don't really understand what it means, even to the point that it's philanthropy. Right, but which is not what we're talking about at all. No. So that's a very, it's hard to say what is it, because it will be very specific depending on the audience. But I think the more podcasts like this, the more training that there is, the more conversations there is, people really start to understand it. There's a lot within the financial institutions. I mean, a lot of the international financial institutions are pretty good on it, but the more local, regional banks, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. I think our regulators and our policymakers need to be braver in this region, in Africa, in emerging markets, which I'm very focused on. I think they need to give clear market signals. Say, this is our plan for green growth, for example. The more market signals you give, the more confidence investors have. So again, I think there's a lot of work to do there as well.
I think we could talk about this forever.
Yes, we could.
But that was a really good summary or bullet point kind of list of, the things that we need to work on moving forward.
Yeah.
Okay, we talked about a lot of things in this episode. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I just want to wrap up the conversation by asking you one last question. So if our listeners were to take just one thing from this conversation, what would you want it to be?
So this is the most exciting question. So I really think we talk about things like sustainable development, climate and inequality as if they're separate from finance. And that's just simply not true, because where money flows, that defines what gets built. It defines who gets access. And it really defines the kind of future that we want to create. And I believe that decision defines who we are. I think it reflects our value system. And I think that has to put things like kindness and empathy and equality, collaboration, humanity, all of that stuff has to be at the core. It comes back to how we started when we talked about extraction. All of that is not going to get us to the place that we want. We're in the mess because of those extractive models, extractive leadership, right? So now we need to take a step back, and we need to say, what are we using finance for that really delivers that kind of world, the kind of world that does reflect equality. And so I think, we don't, the one thing I want you to take is, if somebody says to you, that's not what finance is about, don't listen to them. It is absolutely not about that. Finance and capital is about the world that we want to live in. And I'm pretty sure most people will say, I want to live in a world where, there are people who can have a fulfilling life or are not dealing, climate exposure is killing people, right? So I do think the one thing to take away, be proud of that, right? Success is not about making millions and billions. Success is about the impact you have on the world around you and the joy that actually brings you.
Absolutely.
So I think that would be my one thing.
When you were talking about empathy and kindness and all these things that we need, these are the things that make us human. And I know that when you were saying that, there's probably someone listening who thinks, that's not what finance is about, right? Or this is what it really looks like, on the ground where people in the field and policymakers say, this is not what finance is about. Because it's too empathetic. It's not profit driven. But at the end of the day, these are the things that make us human. And if we want to see real human change, and like you said, most people want to live in a world where there's peace, where there's equality, where there isn't extreme poverty in the world and extreme inequality. We need to put our humanity at the forefront to be able to work towards these changes.
And I think, to the naysayer who says that's not what finance is about, that is a naivety, because actually what we're saying now at this point in the world in 2026 is we need to change our systems. And finance is a core component of that. So if we can use finance to change the system, to create that world, then that's the opportunity. And if you don't see that, you're probably not leading in the world anyway. So
you're missing out.
Yeah. Yes.
I couldn't think of a better way to end this conversation. Thank you so much. I think this is a very inspiring conversation, very eye-opening. It did change, I think, the way many of us think about money and where money should flow. So thank you so much for your time today. And I hope we stay in touch.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is the end of our 3rd episode. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully we'll see you at the next episode.